G'day squad, it's your squid again. Today's video is about a bloke named Edward Micklethwaite Curr and his interactions with the Djadja Wurrung people. Those are the names just there. I don't know if I pronounced them correct, but this bloke's not as nice as the other ones in the other videos I've done in this playlist, but I think he's probably still what we'd describe as a good bloke, or a complicated good bloke. I've written a script about him, and I've written a script about his interactions with the Djadja Wurrung people, and the rest of this video is going to be me reading from that script, because I don't want to stare at you, then stare at the script, then stare at you. Also, because when I'm just reading, I can do it in one shot, but when I'm worried about the camera, it takes me like 3 hours to get a whole script out. So I hope you enjoy this story. If you've got YouTube Premium, as always, you should go fold your washing. If you haven't folded your washing watching one of the other videos, go and do it now. Find something menial that you don't need to pay too much attention on. Do that and listen to me while you're doing it. If you don't have YouTube Premium, that's fine. Just leave your phone open. I think it's an interesting story, and it's another story about a bloke who invented an Aboriginal to English dictionary, a language-focused linguist from early Australia, but I'll stop blabbing and I'll start blabbing. Here's the script.
Edward Micklethwaite Curr's legacy is complex and multifaceted. His interactions with the Djadja Wurrung and other Aboriginal groups were marked by both conflict and cooperation, reflecting the broader dynamics of European colonisation in Australia. There's good parts and bad parts to this story, but the point in my telling it is this. As always, I like to point out that racism, barbarism and genocide were not simply a fait accompli within early Australian history. These people aren't from ancient Rome, they're more like us than anyone ever gives them credit for. The actions I'm going to be discussing in this video took place roughly 200 years ago, which sounds like a lot on face value, but that's less than the lifetime of 3 grandmas on average. Your grandma's grandma could very well have been alive at the same time as the people this video is focusing on. It was 5 fucking minutes ago on a cosmic scale. Let's crack on and get into it, shall we? Edward Micklethwaite Curr was a significant figure in Australian colonial history, particularly known for his interactions with the Aboriginal peoples, specifically the Djadja Wurrung. Curr's life and legacy are intertwined with the broader narrative of European colonisation in Australia, marked by both conflict and cooperation with the Indigenous populations. This video will explore Curr's life, focusing on his interactions with the Djadja Wurrung, the struggles he faced, and his positive engagements with Aboriginal people. The legacy of his actions will be examined through primary sources and historical accounts, and I want you to leave a comment with what you think about him below. Edward Micklethwaite Curr was born in a place we now know as Hobart, Tasmania, on the December 25th in 1820. His father, Edward Curr Sr., was a prominent businessman and pastoralist. The family had moved to Van Diemen's Land, which is now Tasmania, in pursuit of those businesses and farming endeavours, and Edward Sr. had become involved in various commercial enterprises and had been moderately successful in the area. The younger Curr, the focus of our video, was educated in England nonetheless, attending Stonyhurst College and later studying at the University of Cambridge. His education instilled in him a deep appreciation for classical literature and natural history. In 1839, at the age of 19, Curr returned to Australia, settling this time in Melbourne. He soon became involved in pastoral pursuits, just like his father had, acquiring land in Victoria. His ventures brought him into contact with the Indigenous people of the region, though, including the Djadja Wurrung, whose traditional lands spanned central Victoria and the area he had ostensibly bought for his sheep. Curr's most significant interactions with Aboriginal people occurred during that time as a pastoralist in central Victoria. He managed several large farms and what were known as pastoral runs, big swaths of land for cattle grazing. He also spent time at the London Aboriginal Protectorate Station, where he had extensive contact with the Djadja Wurrung people. But I suppose I should rewind a little and explain what a Protectorate Station even is, because they've got a well-earned and well-deserved mixed legacy in this country. I like to zoom out and provide a bit of context in these videos, and the concept of a protectorate is something I don't think I've covered before, so let's just give them a brief rundown. The Ludden Aboriginal Protectorate Station, also known as the Ludden Protectorate, was one of several protectorate stations established by the British colonial government in the 1830s and 40s in Australia. These protectorates were part of a government policy aimed at protecting and assimilating Aboriginal people into European society amidst the rapid expansion of European settlement. The stations were meant to provide a buffer against the worst impacts of colonisation, offering some form of protection and assistance to Indigenous populations. Think about a youth centre or a homeless outreach group today in 2024, but with the specific intent of bridging the gap between Aboriginals and Europeans at the time. The Loddon Aboriginal Protectorate Station was established in 1840 under the authority of the Aboriginal Protection Board. It was located near the Loddon River in central Victoria, in the traditional lands of the Djadja Wurrung people. The protectorate system was an attempt to mitigate the negative effects of European settlement on Aboriginal communities by providing them with some level of government oversight and support. I think it goes without saying that the goals of an institution like this are unlikely to be successful unless the institutions are being led by Aboriginals themselves, though. One couldn't possibly have known the things Aboriginal people needed in order to adapt without the lived experience of an Aboriginal back then. No matter how noble your goals, you were always going to come across as condescending, and you were always highly unlikely to truly understand the loss of culture unless you'd lost it yourself. On the whole, it should be said that I think these protectorates did more harm than good, but I do think it's worth pointing out their positive intentions. There are significant instances of horror in Australian history, from Lachlan Macquarie's ambivalence to Arthur Phillip's initial hostility, but the protectorates were an attempt at cooperation, not condemnation. They were ultimately unsuccessful, but they shouldn't be held in the same regard as the White Australia policy or terra nullius is what I'm saying, in my opinion. I don't think that's fair. These people were trying to do the right thing. They were ignorant, but I think that's far and away better than being malicious. Anyway, I'm getting distracted again. The primary objectives of the protectorates were to protect Aboriginal people, to safeguard Indigenous communities from violence and exploitation often committed by settlers. They provided services like the offering of food, medical care, and education. They encouraged the adoption of European customs and ways of life, and they attempted to settle or resolve any local disputes between the Indigenous and the settlers of the area. Each protectorate station was managed by an appointed and so-called Protector of Aborigines, who was responsible for the welfare of the Indigenous population in their district. Aborigines is an offensive word these days, so that's the two only times I'm going to say it in this video. These protectors were expected to act as intermediaries between the colonial authorities and Aboriginal communities, ensuring that the rights and needs of the latter were respected. Think sort of like a mayor or a political MP, but specifically and only for the Aboriginal population of that area. The Loddon Protectorate was intended to be a place where Aboriginal people could live under the protection of the government while receiving education and training in European agricultural and domestic practices. The station included basic housing, agricultural plots, and facilities for education and worship. However, the resources allocated to the protectorates were often insufficient, leading to poor living conditions and inadequate services. In theory, a protectorate was awesome. In practice, they hardly ever were. The Djadja Wurrung people, whose traditional lands encompass the area around the Loddon River, were among the primary inhabitants of the Loddon Protectorate. Their interactions with the protectors and other European staff were complex and varied. While some Djadja Wurrung individuals and families took advantage of the services offered, many others resisted the constraints imposed by the protectorate system. Although Edward Micklethwaite Curr was not ever the primary protector at the Loddon station, his pastoral activities brought him into close contact with the Djadja Wurrung people in that region. Curr's writings reflect his observations and interactions with Aboriginal communities, providing valuable historic insights into the period. His tenure at the Protectorate from 1841 to 1843 was marked by attempts to mediate between the Indigenous population and the encroaching European settlers. Curr faced numerous challenges in his interactions with the Djadja Wurrung and other Aboriginal groups. These struggles can be categorised into three main areas: cultural misunderstandings, resistance to colonisation, and the impact of European diseases. Let's chat about their cultural misunderstandings first, though. The gulf between the European settlers and the Aboriginal people from a social and cultural perspective was vast. Curr often found it difficult to understand the social structures, spiritual beliefs, and traditional practices of the Djadja Wurrung people. In his writings, he frequently expressed frustration at his inability to communicate effectively and the misunderstandings that arose from differing worldviews. The Djadja Wurrung, like many other Aboriginal groups, resisted the encroachment of European settlers on their lands. Curr documented several instances of conflict, including cattle spearing and clashes between settlers and Indigenous people. These tensions were exacerbated by the settlers' disregard for Aboriginal land rights and traditional practices, which the Aboriginal people clearly held in the highest regard. The accidental introduction of European diseases, to which the Aboriginal population had no immunity, had devastating effects as well. Smallpox, influenza, and other illnesses decimated Indigenous communities, further complicating Curr's efforts to establish peaceful relations with them. He noted the tragic decline in the Djadja Wurrung population due to these diseases in his journals. Despite the challenges, Curr also had several positive interactions with the Djadja Wurrung and other Aboriginal groups, though. These instances highlight his attempts to understand and respect Indigenous cultures, as well as his efforts to mediate conflicts and provide assistance. Curr's most significant contribution to the understanding of Aboriginal cultures was his extensive documentation of their languages and customs. He published The Australian Race in 1886, a comprehensive 4-volume work detailing the languages, traditions, and social structures of various Aboriginal groups. If you're lucky, the National Library of Australia might even grant you access to see the original. They didn't let me, but they might for you. If not, they've digitised them and you can find it online pretty easily as well, just like I did. Curr's detailed records of the Djadja Wurrung language and culture have been invaluable to anthropologists and linguists. Curr often acted as a mediator between settlers and Aboriginal people. He documented several instances where he successfully negotiated peace after conflicts, emphasising the importance of understanding and respecting Indigenous customs. His efforts to resolve disputes and foster cooperation were significant, although not always successful. Curr developed personal relationships with several Djadja Wurrung individuals. He expressed admiration for their resilience and intelligence, and he often relied on their knowledge of the land and its resources. These relationships were built on mutual respect and understanding, showcasing Curr's ability to bridge cultural divides when he wanted to. Edward Micklethwaite Curr's legacy is complex and multifaceted. His interactions with the Djadja Wurrung and other Aboriginal groups were marked by both conflict and cooperation, reflecting the broader dynamics of European colonisation in Australia. Curr's detailed documentation of Aboriginal languages and cultures remains his most enduring legacy. The Australian Race is still referenced by researchers today, providing valuable insights into the lives and traditions of Indigenous Australians in the 19th century. His work has been instrumental in preserving knowledge of Aboriginal languages that might otherwise have been lost. While Curr's efforts to mediate conflicts and foster cooperation were commendable, the broader impact of European colonisation on Indigenous communities was overwhelmingly negative. The loss of land, cultural disruption, and introduction of diseases had devastating effects on the Djadja Wurrung and other Aboriginal groups in the area. Curr's writings, while valuable as historical records, also reflect the paternalistic attitudes of his time, which often failed to fully acknowledge the autonomy and agency of Indigenous peoples. From a historical perspective, Curr's interactions with the Djadja Wurrung offer a nuanced view of the complexities of colonisation. His attempts to understand and document Aboriginal cultures stand in contrast with the often brutal treatment of Indigenous people by other settlers in the area. However, his writings also reveal the inherent biases and limitations of his perspective as a European colonist. In his most successful work, The Australian Race, Curr often contrasts European and Aboriginal ways of life, frequently viewing the latter through a lens of European superiority. This bias is evident in his descriptions of Aboriginal land management and sustainability practices as an example. Curr observed that the Djadja Wurrung and other Aboriginal groups practiced a form of land management that included controlled burning, otherwise known as backburning these days, and a semi-nomadic lifestyle, moving according to seasonal availability of resources. Is a culture nomadic if they're returning to the same place or location every season for the crops they planted, though? I don't think that's what nomadic means. I actually think that's the opposite of what nomads are, but I digress. Curr's interpretation of these practices was coloured by his European agricultural background, leading to a dismissive attitudes towards Aboriginal land use. In The Australian Race, Curr writes, "The native tribes have no permanent homes and live by hunting and gathering. Their methods of burning the land are wasteful and lack the systemic cultivation known to European farmers. This nomadic lifestyle contributes to their perceived lack of progress and civilization." Wasteful. Lack of progress. These are particularly interesting quotes when you realise that today, in 2024, we Australians have to do these controlled burns to prevent catastrophe. They're the main thing that prevents cataclysmic bushfires and wildfires literally every summer, and not doing them within the Aboriginal advised timeframes is a recipe for disaster. Ask Scott Morrison and the hundreds of thousands of dead native animals from 2020. It's almost like the Aboriginals aren't and weren't inherently lazy or stupid like they were made out to be. But I'm getting distracted for a third time now, and you know that's the point I'm making. The point is, even with the language journals and dictionaries we have left over from that time period, there's an element of deciphering that still has to occur because the Europeans were so full of themselves and their unreliable narrators as a result. Edward Micklethwaite Curr's life and legacy are emblematic of the broader narrative of European colonisation in Australia. His interactions with the Djadja Wurrung people highlight both the challenges and the opportunities of cross-cultural engagement. While his efforts to document and understand Aboriginal cultures were significant, they were also shaped by the prejudices and limitations of his time. Curr's legacy, therefore, is a complex one, reflecting the intertwined histories of cooperation, conflict, and cultural exchange that have shaped Australia's past. I do think he counts as one of the complicated but good blokes from Australian history that I'm teaching you all about the last few weeks, but maybe not as good as he could have been. Still better than the caricature you create in your mind when you think of colonists in early Australia, but there was also a lot of room for growth there too, is what I'm saying. Not all history is black and white, I guess. But that concludes another video, guys. The people who give me money are on screen now. Give me money yourself if you want your name included that list and you like these videos. These history videos take way more effort to make than my reactions or shorts, so if you like the video, do me a solid and like the video. Share it with a friend, that would be really helpful. The links in the description all make me money in various ways. Click one and make my day. Failing that, I appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for watching.
And so that was the script. I've been pumping him out the last few days and I'm doing a pretty good job, even if I do say so myself. So do me a solid, as I said, hit that like button wherever it is, leave me a comment, helps in the algorithm, and hit share, then copy link. You don't have to send it to anyone, but as long as the computer gods, the algorithms and all that think you did, then it'll do me a solid and it'll help algorithmically. So yeah, let me know what other videos you want me to make and I'll make them. But failing all of that, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys so much, and I will see you when I look at you. You will see me when you look at me. Thanks for watching.